I was taken aback by my mother-in-law's unexpected words. "I didn't expect you to afford such a place." "Well done, dear. We're more than happy to move in with you." My confusion deepened at her statement. "Excuse me," I interjected, feeling the need to clarify. "With this upgrade, I don't mind holding off on the divorce. Remember, I'm single now, Lucy, 35, working as a doctor at the Women's Health Clinic. My apartment, a comfortable 15-minute drive from work, accommodates not just me but also my husband, William, and his parents. My marriage to William commenced 5 years ago, accompanied by his condition that we live with his parents. Being an only child, I understood his familial obligations. Despite knowing this beforehand, I agreed wholeheartedly. Thus, when we tied the knot, we opted for a larger apartment, embracing life with his parents as part of our domestic arrangement. Initially, when we began our cohabitation, William's parents assured me, "As a doctor, Lucy, you're undoubtedly busy. Leave the household chores to us. Your father-in-law and I will handle everything else while you focus on your work." And true to their word, they diligently managed all cooking, cleaning, and domestic tasks, affording me the luxury of concentrating solely on my professional duties. I assumed William enjoyed the same privileges. However, our dynamic shifted dramatically 6 months later. Abruptly, William resigned from his job. Taken aback, I inquired, "What's prompted this decision? Why quit?" His response was startling. "I believe I've put in my fair share. I need a hiatus before embarking on a fresh start. Besides, even without my income, we won't struggle financially with yours." I countered, "But why such a significant decision without consulting me? You can't guarantee finding another job. What if something happens to me?" His reply was dismissive. "There's no need for pessimism. We have savings to fall back on." Attempting to reason, my mother-in-law intervened. "Now, Lucy, don't be too hard on him. William has toiled diligently thus far. A break is well deserved. Wouldn't you agree? You can compensate for his absence by working a bit harder." Stunned into silence, I pondered the unfairness of her suggestion. My workload was already demanding, and it seemed ludicrous to imply that I should bear the brunt of our financial responsibilities while William enjoyed a respite. After all, I too faced challenges. Upon hearing my retort, my mother-in-law's expression shifted abruptly. With raised eyebrows, she retorted, "Let me remind you, Lucy, you're not the sole one grappling with difficulties here. While you were at work, your father-in-law and I were tending to the household tasks alongside our own jobs without respite. If you insist on such talk, we'll cease our contributions to the household. From now on, you're on your own." Her words struck me dumb. With that declaration, my mother-in-law and William exited the room, heading to the living room to watch TV. Thus began my solitary struggle to juggle both household chores and my job. No one else would lift a finger to help. Takeout meals became a regular occurrence, likely to stave off hunger in their absence of cooking. However, their preferences leaned towards pricey options like sushi, leading to mounting demands for increased funds to cover food expenses. "Lucy, ensure there's enough money for our meals. Are you aiming to starve us?" they plead. Even when I urged restraint, my mother-in-law would counter, "How heartless to suggest scrimping on food when we're confined at home with no other indulgences. You're such a heartless person, neglecting your responsibilities to care for your in-laws. Perhaps divorce is the answer," he declared. Exasperated, I relented, increasing the funds allotted for food, enabling my in-laws and William to indulge in whatever culinary desires they fancied. During a brief break from work, I dashed to a nearby gas station to pick up a few essentials. Upon reaching the counter for payment, I realized my card was missing and my wallet seemed lighter. Momentary confusion gripped me before I hurried home immediately after work. Bursting into the living room, I was met with the sight of a gleaming new television. "Welcome home, Lucy." "Back so soon," chimed in William, his voice laced with fond innocence. "Isn't it splendid, Lucy?" added my mother-in-law, their faces adorned with sinister smirks. "What's this? How did you manage to afford this?" I questioned, baffled by the sudden splurge. "We had savings, obviously." "Savings," came the casual reply. My mother-in-law seized the opportunity to chime in, her tone dripping with fond gratitude. "Oh, Lucy, we had no idea you were saving so diligently for us. You should have mentioned it sooner. With your dutiful contributions, we can now enjoy even more luxuries. You've finally proven your worth as a daughter-in-law." Spotting my card on the table, I exclaimed, "Wait, did you use my savings? And how did you obtain the PI?" The response was dismissive. It's simple to deduce. After all, we're family, my mother-in-law asserted with a satisfied grin. Using William's birthday as the PIN shows your affection for him, she added, seemingly pleased with her deduction. I didn't choose the PIN with William in mind. It simply remained unchanged since our marriage. And my feelings towards William are not as they once were, I confessed. Unfazed, both my mother-in-law and William continued their audacious demands. You haven't fulfilled your duties as a daughter-in-law thus far. There's no need to make a fuss over this. Your obligation is clear. Hand over your savings to us quietly. We expect $3,000, no, $4,000 monthly from now on. Don't try to hide your earnings. Ensure we receive our fair share, they insisted. Incensed by their shameless demands, I snapped back. This isn't a joke. Why should my hard-earned money line your pockets? If you desire funds, earn them yourselves. This applies to you both, mother-in-law and father-in-law. Show some decency and consider household finances before attempting to extort from me. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Yet it took no time for my in-laws to retaliate. Such impertinence, daughter-in-law. Is that how you address your mother-in-law? We see no semblance of gratitude from you. What use is a daughter-in-law who only brings money? Your audacity is beyond belief. There's a line you've crossed, my father-in-law seethed. William, unable to contain his frustration, stormed off to his room, though he soon returned with a piece of paper in hand. Here, he thrust it towards me. It was a divorce decree. To my disbelief, not only was William's signature present, but also those of my in-laws as witnesses. File it if you dare, but be prepared to vacate this condo. Living with a stranger is out of the question. Unlike his wife, William is capable, my father-in-law declared sternly. Lucy will overlook your outburst as a momentary lapse. However, any further defiance will lead to your divorce, they jeered, their laughter filling the room. Anger boiled within me, but so did a glimmer of satisfaction. Yet now wasn't the time for retaliation. Suppressing my urge to lash out, I calmly stated, I'll begin moving my belongings and essentials before making my way to my room. My in-laws and William wore expressions of bewilderment. Did they believe I'd beg for forgiveness at the mere mention of divorce? How naive. The divorce papers, complete with signatures, served as a stark reminder of their intentions. Swiftly, I gathered my belongings and declared, I'm leaving. Don't expect me to come to your aid, even in times of trouble. With that, I departed our condo, the divorce papers securely in my possession, seeking refuge in a nearby business hotel for the night. Taking swift action, I canceled the card William had utilized online. Upon checking my balance, I discovered that the once plentiful account, boasting over $10,000, now contained a mere $3,000. Curiosity piqued, I pondered over their extravagant expenditures. However, my savings weren't limited to that account alone. As a precaution, I had sizable reserves in 2 other accounts linked to them. Though stunned to see $7,000 vanish, I deemed it a necessary sacrifice to sever ties with that family. The following day, I wasted no time and headed straight to the city office to submit the divorce papers. With a sense of relief, I watched as they were duly accepted. To assure the finality of the matter, I double-checked my family register certificate, confirming my newfound status as a divorced individual. At last, I had severed ties with that troublesome mother-son duo. While the urge to rejoice surged within me, I remained composed, knowing there were still tasks at hand. My next stop was a real estate agency, where I attended to 2 crucial matters. Firstly, I invested in a home of my own, utilizing the savings I had diligently accrued over the years. Through this process, I came to grasp the true significance of living life on my own terms. The realization dawned upon me that freedom was a precious commodity, one that could easily be compromised. I understood the importance of seizing opportunities promptly and asserting my autonomy without hesitation. I settled into my new single-story house, reveling in its spacious living room, practical kitchen, and a coveted walk-in closet, all mine. Determined to make it truly mine, I spent the day furnishing every nook and cranny, moving in whatever I could manage. The following 3 days were a whirlwind of shopping, acquiring essentials, and indulging in the thrill of creating my sanctuary. While the expense of replacing everything was significant, I deemed it a worthy investment for a fresh start. A few days later, as I sat down to dinner around 8 p.m., the doorbell interrupted my solitude. Curious as to who could be calling at such an hour, I glanced at the intercom screen to find a familiar sight. William, my former mother-in-law, and my former father-in-law. Almost a nostalgic scene. Anticipating their arrival, I approached the door and swung it open. Before I could utter a word, William launched into a tirade. What's the idea, disappearing without a word? It's madness. His outburst prompted his parents to intervene, urging him to calm down. William, take a breath. We agreed to discuss this calmly later, remember? His mother interjected soothingly. Exactly. Look at this place, isn't it fantastic? It's far more spacious and inviting than our cramped condo, his father added, attempting to diffuse the tension. Despite my protests, they barged into my home without hesitation. Hold on, you can't just waltz in here uninvited, I objected, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. Enough. This is as much our place as yours. What's the harm in us visiting? William retorted, brushing aside my objections. With that, they proceeded to explore my home. The furniture isn't to my taste, but I must admit, the layout is quite decent. It might even be more comfortable than our current condo, his father remarked, surveying the space. I never imagined you could afford such a place. Well done, dear. We don't mind moving in with you, my mother-in-law remarked. Excuse me, we're informing you that we've approved this condo. We'll be residing here with you. Perhaps we can overlook your past transgressions. Though your conduct as a daughter-in-law has been supper, we acknowledge your gesture in securing this residence for us. Perhaps William will find it satisfactory. I suppose I can overlook this. If we can reside here, I don't mind remaining married to you, she continued. Excuse me, who's the wife and who's not getting divorced? I interjected, confused by their assertions. The room fell silent as the three exchanged puzzled glances. I'm not married, you know. I'm single, I clarified. Rather than showing astonishment, they seemed unable to comprehend my words. What nonsense are you spouting? Do you think you can escape the consequences of your disrespect? My father-in-law retorted. In response, I thrust the divorce certificate into William's stunned face, causing a visible shift in their demeanor. Lucy, how dare you take such action without consulting us? Do you expect forgiveness? My mother-in-law demanded. Yes, I do. After all, you provided it to me for that purpose, didn't you? I replied calmly. Lucy, how dare you take such action without consulting us? Do you expect forgiveness? She repeated, her tone growing more agitated. Forgiveness. Your names were clearly stated on the divorce notice, weren't they? Including your names implies a decision was made, doesn't it? You were the ones who initiated the divorce papers, weren't you? William explicitly instructed me to file them if possible, so I did. What's the issue? Upon my firm stance, the three fell silent, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Undeterred, I decided to push the matter further. Let's not forget, you're the ones who kicked me out. It appears you've conveniently overlooked the fact that the condo you currently inhabit is registered under my name. Now that we're estranged, I see no reason to uphold that agreement. Hence, I've terminated it. If you fail to vacate within a week, I'll have you forcibly removed from the premises, I declared. Their expressions quickly shifted from anger to shock, their faces draining of color. With determination, I executed my final move. Dialing a number on my phone, I addressed the receiver. Hello. I regret to inform you that there are trespassers in my home. Yes, 3 individuals who have forcefully entered my property. Please dispatch assistance immediately. The address is. I had summoned the police. As their protests rang in my ears, I remained resolute. Don't assume you can escape consequences. One of them exclaimed. What kind of daughter-in-law are you? It's appalling to involve the authorities in family matters. Remember this. Another added, their words a futile attempt to deflect accountability. With their parting remarks echoing in the air, each swiftly departed from my home. As I had repeatedly stated, I was indeed single. Finally, my battle had drawn to a close. I had braced myself for potential retaliation, expecting them to target me at the hospital where I worked. Surprisingly, they never materialized. Stubbornly, they remained in the apartment even after the expiration of the week-long eviction notice. Shortly thereafter, I received a call from the real estate agent. However, I promptly informed them, those individuals are complete strangers to me. Consequently, they were charged with trespassing and promptly dealt with by the authorities. Each was fined $1,000, but unsurprisingly, none could afford to pay. A relative from the countryside stepped in and settled the fines on their behalf. Subsequently, they were forcibly relocated to the countryside. It's likely that by now, they're toiling away on a farm, unpaid, under the watchful eye of their relative. For me, life is unfolding smoothly. Embracing my newfound independence, I've rediscovered the joys of living alone. After years of prioritizing others over myself, every day feels like a fresh start. Moving forward, I'm determined to savor each moment and seize the opportunities that come my way, ensuring that I make the most of this precious life.
Today is supposed to be the start of our honeymoon, right? Why did you tear up my passport? Just as we finished packing and were about to leave, my husband, in a seemingly crazy move, forcefully tore my passport. His smug face really annoyed me. Honestly, I never planned to go with him in the first place. My intention was to go with my mom. I sensed some tension before we got married, but I had no idea the complicated relationship between my husband and my mother-in-law was this deep. I've never heard of anyone's mother-in-law taking over their honeymoon, at least not in my circle. This unbelievable situation shocked and angered me. But most importantly, I felt really uncomfortable. I started questioning if I made a huge mistake choosing him as my partner. As he brought out scissors and began shredding the passport, I looked at my mother-in-law grinning from ear to ear and thought I needed to get away from here as fast as possible. Unexpectedly, I had the perfect evidence to expose these two. My name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old and have been working for 7 years. Recently, I got the proposal I'd always dreamed of from my boyfriend of 4 years. And now I'm in the middle of planning our wedding and honeymoon. I met my husband after I started working. I've always been the low-key type, and though I had my first boyfriend in college, it seemed he lost interest in the quiet and not so exciting me, and we drifted apart. Years passed without me dating anyone seriously until I started working. I never imagined that out of all my colleagues, I'd be one of the first to get married. My husband was a senior at my company when I was a newbie, and he always supported me whenever I struggled with unfamiliar tasks at work. The only guy I dated in the past was a classmate, but there's something about someone 5 years older. I found my husband dependable and trustworthy. When he asked me out on our first date, I was over the moon. I still cherish the dolphin figurine we bought during our first date at the aquarium. When he said he wanted to date with marriage in mind, I felt like I was on cloud nine. We went on many dates, and he proposed to me at the same aquarium where we had our first date. Can I really be this happy? That night, I was so thrilled that I couldn't sleep, and I still remember that feeling. With my head still in the clouds, we quickly decided to visit his parents' home the following week. However, it was during this time that I began to feel uneasy about the idea of getting married. My father-in-law was very kind, but my mother-in-law seemed to disapprove of me. Hearing her say, "You could have married someone more outstanding than this plain girl," at our first meeting filled me with doubt and anxiety about our future life together. But I told myself that pre-wedding jitters are normal, right? So, I pretended that everything was fine and continued with the wedding preparations. One day, while discussing our life after marriage, both my husband and his mother assumed I would be quitting my job. Although I once admired the idea of quitting work after getting married, it didn't seem like an option for me at this point. Looking back, I realized that my ongoing anxieties about marriage stopped me from considering leaving the place where I felt most secure, my job. Despite dodging persistent suggestions from my mother-in-law to quit, I decided to continue working at the same company alongside my husband. During our wedding preparations, we disagreed on the timing of our official marriage registration. He wanted to formalize things sooner, and in the end, we decided to respect his wishes and registered shortly after. The procedure felt mundane, but realizing that we were now officially married brought me immense happiness. We initially discussed having a small, intimate wedding, but it seems my husband mentioned this to his mother, and she called the next day. "You know, Edward's wedding, and you're talking about having a small, intimate ceremony. Please don't just say whatever you want. The wedding needs to be grand. I'll make sure it's fitting for Edward. By the way, please keep your guest list minimal, just your parents and close friends. Your friends are probably just as dull, right? They'd make the wedding feel so gloomy and ruin everything." I found myself bombarded with opinions about the venue and the guest list. It was infuriating that she felt she had the right to dictate so much. Despite having a lot to say, I convinced myself that maybe this is just how weddings go and decided to invite only my parents and close friends, as my mother-in-law wanted. However, my mother-in-law's interference didn't stop at the guest list. She had opinions about the program, entertainment, decorations, and food. Following her suggestions would push us way over budget. Initially, Edward's family had agreed to cover half of the wedding costs, but somehow that changed, and now it was, weddings are for the bride, leaving us significantly over budget. I had to cover all the additional expenses she wanted, so the wedding turned into a lavish affair, quite the opposite of the simple ceremony I had envisioned. I tried to make some cost-saving changes without her knowledge, but she scolded me, claiming, "It looks cheap because you didn't do as I told you." I thought I would finally get some distance from her after the wedding, but my husband did something unimaginable. Despite my frustration with her interference in the wedding, and despite my desire to keep my distance from her, my husband insisted we live with her. Our new place, for which we had already signed a lease, was canceled without my knowledge. All my belongings intended for that place were redirected to my husband's family home. I was speechless, shocked by how everything had been decided without consulting me. I had handled all the wedding planning, and even when I warned Edward that meeting all of her requests would exceed our budget, he ignored me. The anxiety I had before the ceremony only intensified after our wedding. We had planned an overseas honeymoon to a dream destination I always wanted to visit. The idea of going there for our honeymoon felt surreal. However, my growing unease with Edward, who was acting suspicious, and the prospect of living with my mother-in-law upon our return dampened my spirits. Despite our wedding preparations, Edward wasn't cooperative about the honeymoon planning. Strangely, he took charge of booking the flights and hotels. I assumed he had chosen a romantic hotel for our honeymoon stay, and was excited as usual. Even though I had to cover all the expenses, the pre-wedding excitement made me grateful that Edward was contributing, even if just a little. Little did I know that this was a foreshadowing of a shocking event. The wedding ended, and amidst the chaos, our honeymoon day arrived. Despite lingering feelings about the wedding and the upcoming cohabitation, I was determined to shift gears and enjoy the trip with the man I loved. As I woke up in the middle of the night to get ready for our flight, Edward dropped a bombshell. With an air of casualness, he said, "Sarah, I'm going to go with my mom," just as I was double-checking our luggage. I was shocked and couldn't grasp what he had just said. "What are you talking about? It's our honeymoon, not just any trip. Why would your mother be joining us? Plus, we've only paid for 2 flight tickets and a hotel." Visibly shaken, I tried to make sense of his reasoning when Edward hit me with another surprise. "I never mentioned going on this trip with you, did I? Don't be ridiculous. I'm going with my mom. A trip with her takes precedence over a honeymoon. It's a gratitude trip for all she's done for me. You stay here and prepare the house by cleaning every nook and cranny." With that, Edward forcibly tore apart my passport that I had entrusted to him. I was in disbelief, unable to say a word, just witnessing my passport being destroyed. At that moment, my fully made-up mother-in-law barged into our room without knocking. "Edward, are you ready?" Seeing her, Edward's face lit up. "Yeah, we're good. Finally, we can go on this trip without any interruptions." They both shared a gleeful laugh, leaving me utterly repulsed. I realized I was about to marry an absolute nightmare. While I have been contemplating how to get along with my mother-in-law in our upcoming married life, this exceeded my wildest thoughts. I understand now the kind of people you two are. I couldn't help but speak out, but my words seemed like nothing more than sour grapes to them as they laughed heartily and left together. I had been happy that Edward was helping a bit with our honeymoon, but it turned out he was preparing to go with his mother. He had taken charge of the flight and hotel bookings willingly because he was booking everything under his mother's name from the start, and he dumped all the costs on me. The betrayal from my husband was a heavy blow, but my anger overshadowed the sadness. The dreamy, intimate wedding I had always envisioned and the honeymoon, meant to be the best memory with the one I loved, were both once-in-a-lifetime events, now ruined by my mother-in-law and my husband. Overwhelmed by my situation, I couldn't believe this was happening. Initially, I couldn't accept it, but soon after, I decided I needed to act fast and get a divorce. Interestingly, I had something that would be useful for the divorce. Initially, I started recording with the intent of preserving memories of the most significant events of my life, my wedding and honeymoon. Since the wedding preparations, I had been recording audio, capturing various moments. What started as a pure desire to cherish our wedding memories gradually turned into documenting my mother-in-law's malicious actions and harassment. I often thought of quitting, assuming I'd probably never watch these recordings again, but it's ironic how useful they turned out to be. Just a few days ago, I had moved in and was still unpacking. Now, I began to repack my stuff. Ironically, I hadn't opened much, so packing was done in no time. I wondered if my husband and his mother were at the airport by now. The very thought filled me with indescribable anger, so I tried not to dwell on it. Despite only being there for a few days, I wanted to erase any trace of my presence in that house, so I cleaned thoroughly. While cleaning the living room, I stumbled upon something shocking. It was evidence that my husband was embezzling money from his company. Given his position in charge of company sales, he was reporting lower earnings to the company and pocketing the difference. And apparently, his mother was in on it too. She had meticulously noted the actual sales, the amount pocketed by my husband, and even listed all the luxury bags, clothes, and shoes he had bought for her with that money. It was a significant amount. Leaving such a diary in plain sight in the living room, I really couldn't fathom what they were thinking. Discovering my husband's misdeeds, I was horrified, realizing the gravity of the situation. For a moment, I wondered if working at the same company could somehow smooth things over. But then I thought, why should I help someone who ditched me for a honeymoon with his mother? I headed to the company with evidence of embezzlement. Though they were supposed to be on their honeymoon, having both taken paid leave, my colleagues were shocked to see the very person in the office. Everyone was asking, what happened? Weren't you on your honeymoon? No longer feeling the need to hide anything, I told them that my husband and my mother-in-law had gone on the honeymoon instead, that my passport was torn up, and that I had paid for the entire honeymoon. My colleagues, superiors, and boss were shocked and angry at my husband. I expressed my gratitude to my concerned colleagues and headed towards the executive area of the company. Unbeknownst to my colleagues, husband, and mother-in-law, one of the top executives in this company is my uncle. I intentionally kept this fact hidden to avoid any perception that I got the job through connections. I applied to the company without disclosing my relation to my uncle and earned the position based on my own merit. Since my uncle doesn't handle human resources, I reached out to him before the orientation and requested that he keep our relationship confidential at work. Despite his surprise, he praised my efforts and assured me that our interactions would be like any other executive and employee. My uncle, who doesn't have children of his own, has treated me with affection since I was a child. Until elementary school, my sisters and I went on several trips with just my uncle. During my childhood, I would sneakily ask my uncle to buy things for me, leading to scoldings from my parents. That's how much he adored me. Since joining the company, our work areas have been entirely separate, and after briefly exchanging smiles during the orientation, we haven't met. I knocked on my uncle's office, explained the situation to his secretary, and was granted entry. My uncle greeted me with a beaming smile, but quickly turned somber. "Why are you here? Weren't you supposed to be on your honeymoon?" Seeing my dear uncle's familiar kind face, I was overwhelmed with emotion and burst into tears. Through my sobs, I recounted everything that had happened, and he became visibly enraged. It was a side of him I had never seen before. Of course, I shared the details of my husband's embezzlement and handed over the evidence. My uncle pledged to convene a board meeting immediately to address my husband's actions. Then he asked, "What are you going to do today?" "Head back home." I nodded, and he said, "Well, before you do that, Let's grab some good food. I'll drop you off at home afterward. Despite the incredible betrayal of having my honeymoon taken over by my mother-in-law, I felt genuinely grateful, knowing there were still warm-hearted people in my life who cared for me. A week later, when my husband and his mother returned from what was supposed to be our honeymoon, I received an immediate call. My husband was furious that I hadn't picked them up from the airport and hadn't cleaned the house as instructed. He ranted about my whereabouts. I already had a top-notch divorce lawyer recommended by my uncle and parents, and the process was in motion. Without giving my husband a chance to speak, I said, "You too sure are loud and annoying. I don't want to hear your voices anymore. Why would I pick up someone I'm going to divorce, and why would I follow your silly orders to clean?" He was momentarily speechless, but soon resumed his ranting. "Do you think it's okay for you to say such things? I did you a favor by marrying you. If I divorce you, you'll never get remarried. My mom's furious too. If you come back now and prepare our meals, I might forgive you. We're tired of foreign food. Make some tasty traditional meals." He had never spoken to me like that before our supposed honeymoon. After revealing his scheme with the passport and going on a trip with his mother, his true colors had shown. It dawned on me that I had never truly seen him for who he was. I have been reflecting on this realization over the past few days. I've consulted a lawyer regarding our divorce. Could you please discuss related matters with them? A lawyer? What are you talking about? I'm not getting a divorce. I could hear his mother in the background shouting for him to hand her the phone, calling me names. Well, do what you please. By the way, I informed the company about your embezzlement. I think they'll be calling you in soon. Maybe you should get a lawyer too. Bye. I could sense his panic on the other end, but it wasn't my problem anymore. He kept calling, so I just blocked his number. My uncle was aware of our honeymoon dates, so right after our call, the company summoned my husband using the evidence I provided. They verified the information and confirmed the discrepancies in the payments. It turned out the amount my husband embezzled was enormous. In front of the company's executives, my husband desperately tried to defend himself. He fabricated a story claiming I was the real embezzler, and he had tried to stop me. At that point, my uncle couldn't hold back and shouted, "My niece would never do such a thing. We've confirmed that you and your mother committed the embezzlement. You're lucky we haven't involved the police yet." Realizing the jig was up and that I was related to senior management, my husband looked as if he had lost his soul. That day, I went to the company to return the wedding gifts to my colleagues since our marriage had ended so soon after the wedding. Everyone refused, saying they had given them as a token of their blessings. While I was surrounded by this warmth, my ridiculous husband approached. "Why didn't you tell me you were related to the top brass?" "I'm sorry, really. Can we start over?" "Can you ask your uncle to keep me in the company and make the embezzlement go away?" Disgusted, I replied. "Do you even understand what you're saying? Are you okay in the head? Divorce is the only option now. Reflect on your actions and face the consequences." Having said that, I pushed him away, but he must not have had anywhere else to turn. He clung on desperately. Watching this, my colleagues called security, who dragged him away. He was fired immediately. Regarding the embezzlement, it seems the company is seeking damages from my husband. After finding out about the whole situation, my mother-in-law repeatedly tried to contact my family. However, once she consulted my sensible father-in-law, the calls stopped. I had always wondered why my sensible father-in-law had even allowed our honeymoon in the first place. But when he later came to apologize, admitting his mistake, I understood. After hearing his side, he had believed my mother-in-law was going on a domestic trip with her friends. He was looking forward to a week without my nagging mother-in-law, who was always badgering him about shopping and wanting to dine out, thinking it would be like a little slice of heaven. Then I came home. After hearing about the ridiculous actions of those two, my father-in-law agreed I should return to my parents' home and even helped me pack. At the time, our emotions were high, and without discussing much else, I just went back to my family home. Knowing how genuine, kind, and rational my father-in-law is, unsure he would have stopped all this if he had known. He was the only reasonable person I could trust in that house. Although I was the victim, the thought that my honeymoon had been hijacked by my mother-in-law was incredibly embarrassing. I contemplated resigning from my job, and my parents suggested taking a break from work for a while. However, my uncle, considering that work might serve as a distraction, discussed it with the CEO. They arranged for me to be transferred to a branch office. The divorce process with my husband went surprisingly smoothly, thanks to an excellent lawyer. Later, I discovered my father-in-law's involvement. When planning our wedding and discussing expenses, it turned out my husband had almost no savings. My in-laws, an average working-class family with my mother-in-law's wasteful spending habits, had minimal savings, as my father-in-law ruefully mentioned. Considering the short duration of our marriage, the alimony was substantial, and surprisingly, my father-in-law sold a family home to cover it. Their home was not in a city center, but in a close-knit community. On the day I was supposed to leave for our honeymoon, I returned to the family home, luggage in hand, and with neighborhood gossip in play. Rumors quickly spread. The stories grew exaggerated, making living in that area unbearable. Initially, my mother-in-law, always concerned about appearances, approved of our marriage because both my husband and I worked for prominent companies, a status symbol for her. Now, with rumors circulating due to her actions, she likely couldn't bear to live in that house. My father-in-law probably also felt responsible for covering the damages from my husband's embezzlement. While I hold nothing but disdain for both my husband and mother-in-law, I genuinely feel sorry for my father-in-law. After being fired and ordered to pay damages, coupled with my not returning as he hoped, my husband apparently suffered a mental breakdown, unable to work. He seems to be moping around in a small apartment he moved to. Seeing her beloved son so downcast, my mother-in-law also retreated, becoming reclusive. As my father-in-law told me, he was, in fact, fed up with my mother-in-law and considering divorce, not wanting to spend his later years with her. He asked if I could introduce him to the lawyer I had used. I immediately contacted my uncle, who got in touch with the lawyer. It might take some time, but I hope my father-in-law can live the life he wishes. Thanks to the intervention of the company's CEO and my uncle, I was transferred to a branch office where I'm surrounded by colleagues and superiors who have been incredibly supportive. I'm eternally grateful to my uncle. The only regret I have is missing out on the country we plan to visit for our honeymoon. Once things settle down, I hope to take a relaxed trip abroad. "What's going on with you two?" I exclaimed as I walked in from work, only to find my husband and daughter sprawled on the living room floor. "What's wrong?" I rushed to their side, panic rising in my chest. They were both in the midst of a seizure, struggling to breathe. Without hesitation, I dialed for paramedics, and they were swiftly transported for treatment. As we rushed to the hospital, I was bombarded with questions, but all I could offer were fragmented observations. I was as clueless as anyone about what had caused this sudden collapse. In the hospital, as the doctors tended to them, I was ushered into a separate room, heart pounding with dread. "Are they okay?" I asked, desperation lacing my voice. "They'll be fine," the doctor assured me, especially Bonnie. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. My strength seemed to evaporate at the doctor's words. From that moment, I was thrust into a whirlwind of uncertainty. My name is Wendy, and for the past 5 years, I've been married to Harley, living with our daughter Bonnie. I met Harley during my days as a post office clerk. He frequented the office to send out his handmade items for sale on a flea market app. What began as mere clerical exchanges gradually evolved into conversations, and soon I learned his name. After one routine transaction, Harley left me a piece of paper, hastily scrawled with his phone number. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Eventually, curiosity won over, and I dialed the number. "Hello." His voice on the other end was a mix of surprise and anticipation. "Is this Wendy?" he asked. "Yes, it's me. Did you give me your number?" I couldn't help but chuckle. I had been jittery before making the call, but somehow those nerves dissipated as soon as we began talking. Before I knew it, an hour had flown by, and Harley casually asked me out on a date for the following week. Next week sounds perfect, I replied, feeling a surge of excitement. I'm looking forward to it. And so our dates became a regular occurrence. With each outing, we grew closer, our connection deepening organically. It wasn't long before our companionship blossomed into something more meaningful. There were no grand declarations of love, just a gradual understanding between us. When I was 26 and Harley was 28, he proposed. My response was an enthusiastic yes. I envisioned a blissful married life ahead of us, but reality had other plans. I'm glad your parents were so welcoming, Harley remarked as we walked towards my childhood home. I hope mine will be too. I'm not so sure about that, I admitted, but let's hope for the best. As we entered, my parents greeted us warmly, offering their congratulations. It was a heartwarming moment until my sister, Meryl, appeared. Did you forget to tell Mr. Harley about me? She teased, catching me off guard. I'm sorry, I should have explained, I stammered, feeling a pang of guilt for not preparing Harley. Once the confusion was cleared up, pleasantries were exchanged, but little did I know, this encounter would unravel into a nightmare. Afterwards, my sister and I discussed the situation. Our relationship had never been particularly close, especially after I left home to support our ailing mother. I had sacrificed my education fund for her medical expenses, a decision she couldn't comprehend. I harbor no regrets about the choice I made. Sacrificing my education fund for my ailing mother was a decision I stand by. However, Meryl didn't take kindly to it. That moment became a turning point in our relationship. Despite having walked similar paths until then, from that juncture, we drifted apart. Our communication dwindled, and we seldom kept in touch. Even during occasional visits home, we made a point to avoid each other as much as possible. That dynamic remained unchanged. Yet, strangely, she seemed genuinely pleased about my marriage. I thought this might break the ice, I remarked, attempting to lighten the tension. That's nice. I wish I could find someone like Harley, she mused wistfully. I'm sure you'll meet someone wonderful, I reassured her. But her response caught me off guard. Actually, I think he may have already appeared, she hinted with an enigmatic smile that lingered in my mind. And so our married life began. With the arrival of our daughter, we reached the pinnacle of happiness. However, as time passed, subtle changes crept into our lives. Harley started coming home unusually late and began venturing out more frequently, even on holidays. Then, tragedy struck. Upon returning from work one day, I found both my husband and daughter lying unconscious in the living room. Panic surged through me as I rushed to their side, calling for help. Paramedics arrived swiftly, whisking them away for treatment. What happened? I asked frantically as they were taken to the hospital. I don't know, I confessed, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. At the hospital, after hours of agonizing wait, the doctor finally called me aside. Are they okay? I asked, bracing myself for the worst. They're stable now, the doctor assured me, but they've suffered from acute nicotine pesticide poisoning. Relief flitted through me, but it was short-lived as the gravity of the situation sank in. Caught in a whirlwind of emotions, I found myself grappling with an unexpected turn of events. I am sorry, I mumbled, struggling to process the ordeal. I was taken aback by the diagnosis. What is acute nicotine pesticide poisoning? I inquired, my voice trembling with worry. It's a poisoning caused by ingesting an ingredient found in pesticides, the doctor explained. Symptoms include dizziness, convulsions, and difficulty breathing. Dread gripped me as I absorbed the severity of the situation. The doctors bombarded me with questions, probing for any clues about what could have caused it. But I was at a loss. I couldn't even recall what they had eaten before I arrived home. They were admitted to the hospital for further examination, but the next day brought a new wave of distress. Police officers arrived at our home. What's going on? I demanded, my heart racing with anxiety. This case appears to be more than just an accident. One officer stated, "We'll be investigating it as a potential crime. Can you tell us exactly how you found them?" Their scrutinizing gazes made me uneasy. It was clear they harbored suspicions, though I couldn't fathom why. Nevertheless, I cooperated with their inquiries, hoping to dispel any doubts. During the search, an officer discovered pesticides in our trash can. "I don't know anything about this," I protested, genuine confusion clouding my mind. "I don't remember buying it." Despite my protests, I was escorted to the police station for further questioning. I reasoned that fleeing would only deepen their suspicions. At the station, they took my fingerprints, which were later matched to those found on the pesticide container. I was detained pending the results. Anxiety gnawed at me as I awaited the outcome. When the results came back, the officer's words struck me like a blow. "Your fingerprints match those on the pesticide," he declared. "You're now a suspect in an attempted murder case." I was stunned. How could this be? I couldn't comprehend why my fingerprints were on the pesticide, let alone why I would harm my own family. As I sat in the interrogation room, my mind raced with confusion and fear. The interrogation stretched on, each question digging deeper into my actions on that fateful day. It started like any other day. I began, my voice trembling. I went to work at the post office as usual. After my usual lunch at a nearby cafe, which lasted about an hour, I returned home. I recounted to the officer. He seemed satisfied, but then he asked about the day before. "That afternoon, I went to a nearby supermarket and bought a cake," I explained. "After that, I went straight home." The officer then presented me with a laptop. "Take a look at this," he said, showing me a video clip from a surveillance camera at a store. In the footage, a woman stood in front of a shelf stocked with pesticides. "Is that not you in the video?" the officer inquired. My heart skipped a beat as I scrutinized the screen. "What is this?" "Why, it's me," I gasped. But then realization dawned on me. No, wait, this is not me. The officers exchanged incredulous glances. "Are you sure?" one asked cautiously. I pointed to the screen, where I noticed a detail. "Look here," I urged, indicating a mole near the woman's mouth. "I don't have a mole. This isn't me. It's my twin sister, Meryl." The revelation stunned even the police. "Your twin sister." They echoed in disbelief. As they reviewed the evidence, they found footage of me at the supermarket wearing the same clothes as the woman in the video. However, no one outside my family would know if I had left the house dressed like that. "It all makes sense now," I murmured. That's what it meant. Concern flooded me as I realized the implications. "What has happened to my husband?" I inquired anxiously. "If he's out of the hospital and back at home, please check on him immediately. I believe he's been seeing my sister." The officer looked taken aback. "How can you be so sure?" Taking a deep breath, I explained, "Because they're having an affair. They're trying to frame me. But your husband is a victim too, isn't he? That way, suspicion would be diverted." The gravity of the situation seemed to dawn on the police. "We'll need to investigate further," the officer conceded. "I understand," I replied. "But please check on both of them. It'll reveal everything." I understood that I was being detained. Typically, I would have been arrested immediately, but they decided to hold off on my arrest, recognizing the significance of my testimony. It felt like I was hanging on by a thread. 2 days later, I was summoned back to the interrogation room. "As you suspected, we looked into your husband and found evidence of an affair," the officer informed me. "We spoke to him, and he confessed to everything." "I'm sorry about this," the officer continued. "It was our oversight." For the time being, I was exonerated, but the ordeal was far from over. The betrayal by Harley and Meryl cut deep, especially considering they had implicated my young daughter. I knew I had to confront Harley. "You've done a despicable thing," I told him, struggling to contain my anger. "I can't believe you involved Bonnie in this to frame me. Meryl must have been behind this." Indeed, it turned out that Meryl had orchestrated the entire scheme. She had suggested preparing pesticides to frame me as a murderer, Harley, under her influence, had bought the pesticide and laced the cake with it while I was away at work, just as I had come to visit him. So, where's Meryl? I demanded. I don't know, Harley confessed. I couldn't reach her before the police took me. She must have run away. You'll pay for your crimes, I warned him. You're not getting away with this. As expected, Meryl had disappeared, but the police eventually found her hiding out at a man's home she had met through a dating service. She was taken to the police station, where she confessed to everything. I rushed to the police station to confront her. Meryl, why did you do this to me? Because I've never liked you since you left, she spat back. Then she revealed her resentment, explaining how she felt inferior to me for sacrificing my education for our family's sake. Despite the pain and betrayal, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for my sister. Her negative feelings towards me had festered over time, culminating in incidents like this one. Was that why you approached Harley? I asked, struggling to comprehend her motives. I just thought that if I slept with your husband, you would despair, she confessed coldly. When he came to greet me at the wedding, I knew I could manipulate him. In other words, she didn't choose Harley for who he was. She chose him because he was my husband. He said he was going to be with you when I was gone. That stupid man had a crush on me. I just made it easy for me to take advantage of him, she continued, devoid of remorse. I can't forgive Harley, but still, he was just being used by her. Despite the betrayal, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pity for Harley. Why did you target Bonnie? I demanded, struggling to contain my anger. Of course, it's because she's your daughter, she retorted, callously confirming my suspicions. Well, whatever the reason, what you did is unforgivable. You'll pay for it for the rest of your life, I vowed, my voice trembling with anger. With those words, she was taken away. The trial of Harley and Meryl commenced. My husband was accused of framing me for attempted murder and faced numerous charges. In the end, he was sentenced to prison, including payment of alimony. Meryl, too, faced trial, and despite her execution, she would soon serve her sentence and come out. However, even if they atoned for their crimes, the scars of their actions would linger. They would forever be labeled as ex-convicts. Meanwhile, my parents offered to move in with us. Would you and Bonnie like to come live with us? My mother proposed. I think your mom would be happy if you did. Though hesitant at first, I accepted her offer for my mother's sake, who was exhausted from the ordeal. With my mother's recovery and Bonnie's cheerful presence, our new life together began. From now on, the four of us would reside in a new house, finding happiness together.